So the European Commission just quietly published a 500-page report where they explicitly revealed their plans to start freezing bank accounts. They even talked about executing an overnight 50% confiscation of people's wealth, and they even told us which countries are going to be affected first. Let's dive straight into some of the quotes from the report so you guys can see it for yourselves. We can see buried on page 79 of volume 1 of this report, they said the spread of artificial intelligence should be exploited to reduce taxpayers' opportunity for tax evasion. But it's nothing compared to this quote they've got buried on page 53. We can see that they have this little table showing us how effective these one-off capital levies have been previously. A one-off capital levy, this is kind of like an overnight wealth confiscation event. So this is a type of event where you wake up and the government says, oh, you have $100,000 in your bank account. Now you only have $50,000 because we took 50%. And we can see they showed us how successful these one-off capital levies have been previously. They have a table and they point to Germany and how they implemented a 50% one-off capital levy in 1949, which ended up giving the German government 60% of the country's GDP in a wealth gain. We can also see that they pointed to Japan and they showed how they were able to execute a one-off capital levy that ranged between 10% to 90%. That means some business owners and homeowners had to give the government 90% of the assets, which is, again, it's insane, but it's not nearly as insane as what the European Commission said after they showed us this data. They actually had the audacity to say this: if there are indeed one-off capital levies, and if these are not anticipated by the taxpayers, then the taxpayers won't have the time to respond and avoid the tax. This is absolutely insane, but it's not nearly as interesting as the next quote. So buried in page 308 of volume 1 of this report, the European Commission went on to say very wealthy individuals do not contribute their fair share to the financing of European welfare states. The use of wealth-related taxes could be intensified to counter wealth inequality. Now, that word intensified is something I want you to keep in the back of your mind throughout today's deep dive, because it is true that on average, Europeans typically pay their governments around 50% per year in taxes. But the talk of one-off capital levies, exit taxes, and net wealth taxes, this is going to be the next step that I think is going to come at us much quicker than most people think, because if you've been listening to what Christine Lagarde's been saying recently,
it is thus essential to swiftly adopt the regulation on the establishment of the digital euro.
she's kind of ringing the alarm bell, so to say. So we're going to have to be coming back to Christine Lagarde a little bit later on into today's deep dive. If you watch it to the end, you are going to know exactly which countries are going to be rolling out these exit taxes and wealth taxes first. We're also going to be showing you which Western countries are these policies and laws going to spread to, because I can promise you one thing, they will not remain contained within Europe. And I'm obviously going to show you guys how to actually protect yourself. We're going to get actionable. We're not just going to show you the doom and the gloom, because obviously when people were talking about this report online, it's pretty easy to get sucked into the doom and the gloom. So believe it or not, this report, it was quietly published, and it was published in 3 separate parts. And I think the bureaucrats over at the European Commission, they hoped that we'd only read the 17-page executive summary, because in that executive summary, it's a lot more palatable. A lot of the inflammatory quotes are actually buried inside the 327-page volume 1 part of the report. And then there's a lot of other really interesting case studies buried inside the volume 2, which is 95 pages long. I've literally probably spent 20 to 50 hours, maybe 100 hours reading all of these reports and getting you the best quotes. Because if you are in Europe or anywhere around the world, you need to be very aware of what our bureaucrats are planning. So the title of the report kind of gives it away. The title is Wealth Taxation, Including Net Wealth, Capital, and exit taxes. This is really interesting framing to be aware of because big picture, whenever a government starts taxing its population, 50%, 55%, 60%, it starts to get really difficult to actually entice the population to go and work 365 days a year if they're working 300 days for the government. And that's kind of where Europe is right now. And this is why we're seeing so many millionaires leave the UK. And this is why they're writing reports talking about exit taxes and net worth taxes and billionaire taxes.
We have to have a global asset registry. We have to know who has the freaking money.
Because they know that we're kind of at that tipping point and things are about to go sour. But you can't really understand all of the quotes in this report that we're going to be diving into today unless you have a broader context of what's happening in Europe right now and what our leaders like Christine Lagarde, head of the ECB, and Ursula von der Leyen, head of the European Commission, have been talking about and planning for over the past few months. So let's not forget, Ursula von der Leyen tweeted this from her official Twitter account. She said, direct quote, "We need to mobilize private capital." And she's also tweeted this out where she said, "We'll turn private savings into much needed investment." Both of those are real tweets, they're real quotes, and they're not nearly as scary as what Christine Lagarde said in an ECB blog post in 2025. She said, "There is an urgent need to channel citizen savings into EU priorities." What the f is an EU priority? Just think about that for a moment. And if we go even further back in history, you can see that this has been a plan for at least the past 3 to 4 years in Europe. This is another ECB blog post. They said, "We need a capital markets union that channels Europe's vast savings into tomorrow's engines of growth." Later on in November 2024, you can see they actually had a blog post titled, "Follow the Money, Channeling Savings into Investment and Innovation in Europe." The takeaway from all of these quotes and articles and blog posts and interviews coming out of our leaders in Europe is they're essentially saying there's a lot of savings, 10 trillion euros of savings in private citizens' bank accounts. We're just going to come and raid them. That's essentially what they're saying. And let's not forget, it's not just Christine Lagarde or Ursula von der Leyen, it's also Larry Fink. We did a deep dive on this topic in, I think, late 2025, where from memory, he published a letter in the Financial Times titled something like Rethinking Globalization, 45 days before he was installed as the new co-chair at the World Economic Forum. And he essentially said the exact same thing. He said that we're going to channel citizen savings into local infrastructure. Again, why does the government seem so obsessed with taking our savings into their priorities? That's something we'll probably explore today. But let's move on, okay? The broader context is Europe in particular, as well as governments from all around the world, are very focused on coming after our savings and channeling them where they want to send them. But most people would have recognized there's been a little bit of an acceleration over the past 3 to 6 months. Let's explore why we're seeing that acceleration in a little bit more detail. So I believe that the reason why we're seeing this acceleration in digital IDs being rolled out and CBDCs being talked about, it's for 2 reasons. It's multifaceted. The first being it's a technological necessity. So AI is developing very quickly and bureaucrats are looking at this and they're seeing this as like their golden opportunity. In chapter 9 of today's video, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So they have the technological capability to control us, but technology is a double-edged sword. It is also providing hope. Providing freedom. It's allowing some of the fastest growing trends in the world of people dumping their 9 to 5, finding work online, and they're becoming digital nomads. They're working from anywhere around the world. They're flying to Paraguay or Dubai, and they're setting up tax residencies there where they don't have to pay 60 to 70% of their income to the government, like most Europeans, Australians, and Canadians are after you factor in inflation, property taxes, land taxes, and all sorts sorts of other taxes that we do see in those Western countries. So that's kind of like the first big battle. Technology. They can imprison us, but people are escaping the prison. That's why we're kind of seeing that acceleration, so to say. The second reason for why we're seeing this disturbing push in Europe, it's actually geopolitical. So America is kind of going the other way. We saw a lot of the quotes come out of the World Economic Forum conference in January earlier this year, and it became abundantly clear that America and Europe, for the first time in decades, they are no longer as closely aligned as many people previously thought they were.
Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's a failed policy. It has left America behind.
This framing is really important to always keep in the back of your mind, because if the bureaucrats are openly, publicly complaining and kind of freaking out a little bit about the current world order fracturing apart, that means behind closed doors, something has fundamentally changed with the monetary system, okay? And this is something we talk about all the time on this channel. I don't have the time to break down the geopolitical aspect for why we're going to see this acceleration into digital IDs and CBDCs in today's video, but I will be dropping a deep dive on that topic in the coming weeks. Make sure you subscribe for when that drops. I think something like 55% of you guys watching these videos are not subscribed, so make sure you do press that little button down below so you're notified for these deep dives. Now, speaking of deep dives, perfect transition. Let's move into some more of the most insane quotes from these 3 reports, okay? I played you the 3 most inflammatory, but there's a few more that should certainly make you start scratching your head a little bit. So if we're talking about the most insane quotes of this report, we have to go to page 78 and 79 when they have this little section talking about the suppliers of tax evasion services. Have a look at what they say here. So they're referencing another report that suggests substantial financial sanctions should be imposed on the suppliers of tax evasion services. So who are these suppliers? Is this your family tax advisor or your wealth advisor or your financial planner? Are these the financial suppliers of tax evasion the EU is referencing? Well, they go on to say this about those suppliers. They suggest that we should quote unquote co-opt these wealth managers in efforts to address aggressive tax planning by high net worth individuals, including making these suppliers become whistleblowers. They're literally talking about co-opting financial advisors and tax accountants, turning them into government whistleblowers. That means moving forward, everything that you say or tell your accountant, financial advisor, or planner, you need to act upon the assumption that this information is going direct to the government, because you are not able to verify whether your personal family planner is now co-opted by the government. That is insane, because we've seen not only in Europe but globally how well we can trust these types of financial advisors. Who remembers what happened in France just earlier in 2026? A French tax official literally sold the private information of all of her clients. This includes how much money they hold and where they live. We can see that in 2026 alone, there have been 77 violent kidnappings against people who hold Bitcoin in the country. And that is because, oh, what a surprise, government employees, or should I say a French tax official, sold your information to criminal networks. How insane is this? Have a look at the map of the attacks and how aggressively they are growing. And guess what? What did the French government decide to do about this? Nothing. What's actually changed? All we're seeing is an increasing amount of physical attacks because France is not interested in protecting its citizens. France does not want to prosecute those doing harm in the country. You should really ask yourself why. You should ask yourself, why are governments writing 500-page reports on talking about how they can steal 50, 60, or even 90% of your wealth in a one-off capital levy? But for those people who actually get their wealth out of the system and they get it out of arm's reach of a government who wants to take it overnight, do they get protected? Of course not. And you have to ask yourself, why? Is it because the bureaucrats want to make the escape valve look more dangerous or less attractive to individuals like you and I who actually want to save our value? Look, I don't want to speculate why the French government is not protecting Bitcoin holders who use the escape valve and get their money outside the system. For now, before I show you the next set of quotes I've got for you, one thing should be abundantly clear. You need to take control and responsibility over your own money, the best way to do that and the first step you need to take in that process is to hold your own Bitcoin in a hardware wallet like this. I think Bitkey is the easiest to use Bitcoin hardware wallet there is in the space, which is why I've partnered with them. And if you want to actually protect your Bitcoin holdings, make them more private. Again, it's not illegal to hold Bitcoin privately. I always recommend you reach out to my friends at the Bitcoin Way. They have 25 years of cybersecurity experience, and they can help you protect your Bitcoin safely so you don't end up like the 77 families who've been kidnapped and tortured in France. Again, this is not a laughing matter. This is a serious matter. If you want to book a free 30-minute consultation with the Bitcoin Way, there's a link down below. And if you want a discount on a Bitkey, you can use a promo code Luke to get $25 or 25 euros off your order. Take advantage of that while you can. Now let's talk a little bit more about why I think this attack on the escape valve is going to spread to other countries. Let's have a look at this next section of the report. So at the very bottom of volume 2, they did something that they'd never talked about in the executive summary of this report. They admitted that wealth taxes not only don't work, but they said we are going to squash any countries who try to give you an escape valve and a way to escape the really high taxes that's in Europe. Let's have a look at the Spanish example that they reference. So the city of Madrid tried to make itself a little bit of a tax safe haven, but very quickly, look what the central government of Spain did in 2022. We can see in the report they said to prevent a race to the bottom, the central government of Spain has approved the introduction of an additional net wealth tax in December 2022, formerly known as the TST on large fortunes. They then went on to say the practical effect of the TST-LF is that regional tax credits for the wealth tax have been effectively suspended since 2023. So as soon as there was a loophole for the Spanish citizens to use, they used it, and the central government said, nope, we can't have that. We can't have anyone escaping the tax trap that we want to set. And they also reference another example in Norway. So Norway actually learned very quickly how difficult it is to tax people in the digital age. They thought that they were going to raise hundreds of millions of dollars with this new tiny incremental tax increase, and hundreds of millions of dollars left the country in under 1 year. And you can see this trend across all these European countries. Austria ended its Bitcoin tax exemption in 2022. They now have a flat 27% tax rate on all Bitcoin holders at like 27%. They reversed that tax exemption in 2022. Italy came out and raised their taxes on Bitcoin holders in 2025. Even more recently, one of the biggest countries in the world, Germany, who had a tax exemption for over a decade on Bitcoin holders, they just scrapped that. So previously in Germany, you're allowed to hold Bitcoin for more than a year. And when you did, you got a massive tax exemption for saving your money and not speculating. But now that's been proposed to be reversed for the first time in over 15 years, which is kind of crazy. And then there's the 2023 Portugal example. This one's a really interesting one because I had a lot of friends who said, Luke, why don't you go buy a golden visa in Portugal? When I left Australia in 2022 and I said I was never going to go back, I was obviously looking for a second home. So Portugal's golden visa was a really attractive option to me. If you had invested money in Portugal and you were a resident for 5 years, you were then eligible to become a citizen of Portugal, and you got an EU-based passport. Very attractive, very difficult to get. And guess what happened? Just last year, like that, overnight, Portugal completely scrapped this program. This means they're a little bit less friendly to Bitcoin when it comes to taxes, but this means a lot of people who have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars and 4 years of their life living in Portugal, expecting to be able to apply for citizenship next year, that is all now scrapped. That is all now potentially changing, and the rules have been literally reversed like that overnight. That's again another big reason why I haven't chose to create any ties to any of these European countries, because they're all suffering from the same problem we're going to be looking at in a moment. Before I get to looking at that problem and their proposed solution, I want to tackle another really interesting discovery that I found on page 310, 311, 12, 13, and 314 of this report. We just showed you how they're closing open the exit doors, meaning there's going to be fewer and fewer escape holes in Europe. But have a look at what they admitted. This is the most damning part about the report. In these 5 pages, they go through 10 different previous examples of wealth taxes in the EU. And look at what they found. So we can see when wealth taxes were introduced in Austria in 1994, what did the government get? They got low revenue because, surprise, surprise, people avoided the taxes. We can also see this wealth tax provided a very high burden on the firms trying to introduce it. But of course, some people will say that's the 1990s, Luke. Technology has changed. Well, let's have a look at some more recent examples. We can see in 2017 in France, what happened? It failed because it couldn't actually achieve the socialist redistribution that the government thought it would get. We can see the same thing happened in Sweden in 2007. It also failed. It failed in Finland in 2006 because of a fear of capital flight and migration, and the administrative costs were very high. It failed in Germany in 1996. It failed in Denmark in 1997. It failed in the Netherlands in 2001, and they're bringing back the 36% unrealized capital gains tax in Netherlands this year in 2026. Why have they not learned their lesson? Ask yourself that. Why do they keep pursuing these Orwellian laws? Have a look at all the other countries it's failed in. Wealth taxes have failed in Iceland, India, Japan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Ireland, and Luxembourg. All of these wealth taxes were abolished, all for the exact same reasons. So ask yourself, if they are well aware, let me remind you, those were reports and research conducted by the EU Commission. So just think about this for a moment. The same EU Commission that's advocating so heavily for wealth taxes, if they're openly showing you all of the research, showing you that wealth taxes have failed in all of the countries that's been tried, why are they still pursuing wealth taxes? Well, I think there's 2 reasons for this. There could be a pretty telling reason for why they included this 5 pages of research buried at the very bottom of the first volume of this report. Again, this is on pages 310 to 314. Ask yourself, maybe they just didn't want people to read the most damning part about the report, which is why they buried it at the very bottom of it. So they know that wealth taxes don't work. They are actively trying to close the escape valves from any people trying to avoid taxes by using little regional tax loopholes in the EU. They're attacking Bitcoin. They're about to track every Bitcoin transaction. But this is why they named the report what they did. We can see they called the report a publication of the study on not only wealth taxation, including net wealth, capital wealth taxes, but also exit taxes. They know that when they raise the taxes higher, people are eventually just going to leave. So they're showing, okay, it doesn't matter whether you stay or whether you leave, we're just going to tax you. And you can see all of the countries, not just in the EU, they're all moving in the same direction. We know France has revived discussion about a citizenship-based taxation program. Again, there's only 2 countries in the world that have this, America and Eritrea. These countries have essentially enforced global taxation on their citizens. That means it doesn't matter where you live, you got to pay taxes back to your home country. France is now wanting to become the 3rd. And then you have all of these other more recent changes. Canada's made it more difficult to leave and not pay taxes back to the home country. The UK infamously scrapped its non-dom taxation program a couple of years ago, which is why we're seeing 15,000 millionaires leave the UK every year. That was kind of like a final domino. And then we also, I'm well aware of this one, but Australia is making it more and more difficult to leave the country forever and not pay taxes to your home country. Again, I haven't lived in Australia for 5 years, but I'm going to have to pay taxes for a lot of those years that I have been away. Again, it's very difficult to organize being overseas, and I don't want you guys to get the wrong message. I am not a financial advisor. You should always pay your taxes, but just be very aware of the information that you give, because if you live in France, you could get a knock on your front door by a criminal. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But let me talk a little bit further about the why we're seeing this now. And what do I actually expect is going to come next? Because we can see the EU, they actually did publish this little section titled, "What are the main challenges to implementing all of these different array of taxes that we want to force through?" So we can see that they're well aware that this is unconstitutional. They said themselves, exit taxes must be designed in line with EU law. Inheritance and gift taxes can raise issues under national constitutional provisions on family protection and property rights. However, these constraints do not make wealth-related taxes impossible, but they require careful legal drafting and in some cases, just some constitutional clarification. Of course, we're not going to rip up the Constitution, but we will find a way to get it in. The same way that they found a way to get chat control in for the 7th time. It was rejected on 6 occasions, but on the last day of the European summer, when half of the MPs are not even in Parliament, they changed the rules of what actually gets a law allowed to be in, and they created some sort of an emergency to make voting on chat control on the last day before European summer an essential thing that they had to ram in. So what's really interesting is they actually changed the threshold of votes. So that means that for a law to be rejected, it had to get 360 opposition votes. And what's really interesting is more people actually opposed chat control than those who were in favor, even after half of the MPs weren't even in Parliament on this final day before the European summer just recently. But guess what happened? Because we didn't get the threshold of 360 people rejecting it, what happened? Chat control was rammed through. This is democracy. So again, without getting super fired up, this is what they're going to do with all of these wealth taxes. They're going to find a crafty way to still not break the Constitution and say we're a democratic country, but they're going to ram it through. And this gets me to why. This is probably the most important part of this video. This chart right here explains why. All of the European countries have the same issue. They have a debt issue. And this answers the question that so many Europeans probably have. I mean, if you add up all of the taxes, income taxes, business taxes, land taxes, property taxes, home taxes, water taxes, they're coming soon. If you add them all up, and inflation, the very important tax that's not normally called what it is a tax. In Europe, you're paying 60 to 70% of your money and your income to the government every single year. And the government is saying, yeah, it hasn't really worked, so we're just going to do more of something that hasn't worked. And it's all because all of these European countries, they have a massive debt issue. If you look at this chart and look at the biggest debt to GDPs around the world, what do you notice? Greece, you can see Italy, you can see the UK, Belgium, Canada, France, Spain, all of the countries pushing through the most draconian laws, they have the most amount of debt. And we've seen this hundreds of times in human history. Paper money always returns to its intrinsic value of 0. And when a government gets bankrupt, they take your money to pay back their debt. It is as simple as that. And they're going to do that through all sorts of different ways. In the early 2010s, we saw bank failures. And what happens? We saw bank bail-ins. We saw banks being frozen for multiple years. And by the way, this didn't just happen in Cyprus, it happened in Greece. It has happened in many big, Western G20 countries. And people still think that their money is safe. They think, yeah, that Bitcoin thing, that's risky. I'd prefer to have money inside the system. I just think that's, a terrible idea. Again, people don't even know that solutions exist to let you stay outside of the system. One of the solutions that I love the most is what Ledn provides you. They actually let you borrow against your Bitcoin so that you never have to sell it, or you never have to keep a large chunk of your net worth in a bank to pay for bills. You can apply for a loan and get either money in your bank or money in your stablecoin address in hours with Ledn. It's an absolute no-brainer. I use them personally. I've talked about them a lot on the channel previously. You can get a discount on the fees on your first loan if you use the link down below in the description. Again, using the escape valve is an essential way that we can actually escape these tyrants' control. Okay, they are building out this digital prison, and they're kind of foreshadowing us what is going to come next. Look what the European Central Bank said recently. So in this recent Financial Times article, Christine Lagarde came out and she said that the ECB does not need to fight inflation with the same force as they did in 2022 and 2023. So what does that mean? Are they saying they're going to to let inflation run hot. Again, I think you can kind of read in between the lines of what's coming next, especially when you hear what she said in this little cryptic interview where she's talking about more price shocks coming.
Because these negative supply shocks have tended to push prices upwards, interest rates have moved away from the effective lower bound.
And she's also said that we are likely to face more quote-unquote shocks that push inflation away from their 2% target. What are these shocks, you ask? They're going to be more massive amounts of money printing. When we saw the big print in 2020, when central banks from around the world came together to print $10 trillion, this is what really accelerated the trend of people leaving these Western countries because it's just getting too expensive. You're paying way too much to live in a country that's not even safe anymore. And they don't even want you there. That's the wild thing. And Lagarde's kind of saying, look, the next shocks are coming. This is why we're rolling out this report right now. This is why Western countries are so hyper-focused on rolling out a CBDC and a digital ID in lockstep, in tandem, as quickly as possible. Because they want to close the escape valves before the next big print starts. Again, they have no intent to stop printing money and lower the debt. They will never do it. Again, listen to Christine Lagarde when questioned about the bubble on the ECB's balance sheet.
There is this graph about the balance sheet of the European Central Bank and the money that is on there now. And here it is. What I would like to show our viewers and ask the question about is, this is going over 8 trillion euros now. Mm-hmm. And isn't what you just told us about the cryptocurrencies, don't we see a gigantic bubble here on your balance sheet with the euro? And isn't this graph very nerve-wracking?
Well, I can tell you that there is 0 crypto assets in the balance sheet of the ECB.
That I know.
Point number one. Well, I just don't want any ambiguity about it.
Yeah.
But you have to think in terms of counterfactual. If we had not decided on March 18th, when we put together the pandemic emergency program and then subsequently increased the volume of commitment that we made to the European Union economies, we would be in a devastated situation. So I don't regret any of that move that we took on that day, which was 4 months into my job, to significantly increase the size of the balance sheet, because that's all we had. Yeah. Otherwise, the economy would have collapsed and it would have been even accelerated by a financial crisis.
You had to do it. It was the COVID crisis. You say that's
yes,
what we needed to do. But how do you get it?
It will
back?
come. It will come. In due course. Yeah.
How?
In due course, it will come.
Yeah.
No,
but do you sleep at night when you see this?
And what's most hilarious about that clip is, since it was filmed a few years ago, has the bubble on the ECB balance sheet been driven down? Has it been lowered? No, of course it's not. It's because our governments have too much debt and there is no way out. This fourth turning, this 80-year long-term debt cycle, it's only going one way, and you're not going to want to be there when it really unwinds, because we're not there yet. Things are going to get a lot more interesting over the next few years. This 500-page report that they just quietly published is just one example of their plans accelerating. They're coming. They're going to be coming at all of us much quicker than you think. Look, these people have been very consistent with their plans and where they want to push us. And again, like Christine Lagarde said earlier, the next crisis, it's coming. And I think the next crisis could be coming a little bit quicker than most people think. If you want to learn a little bit more about what I think the next crisis BlackRock and Christine Lagarde are planning for, I'm going to put a couple of links to some other deep dives I've done on this topic up on screen somewhere around there. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching this one. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay vigilant out there.